let's go ahead and dive in. My name is Lily Schurra. I work with a team over at Zuva. I'm a legal ops, legal tech specialist. I call myself a legal ops nerd. Very proud of that fact. Why don't we go ahead and get some introductions from the panelists before we dive into the questions? CLM side, we'll start with you. Jerry, do you want to introduce yourself?
I would love to. Hello. Although you can't see it on my screen anymore, I usually have a little badge here telling what I do. I'm Jerry Levine, Chief Evangelist and General Counsel at ContractPodAi. I have been practicing law with some success, I guess, for about 15 or 16 years now. I remember going to law school at one point. I also remember, which is more than I remember what I had for breakfast this morning. I am a huge proponent of legal technology, or technology as I sometimes like to call it, and the way we can apply it to law, but also the way we can bring the legal team more in connection and effectiveness with the entire business. Big believer in giving lawyers, procurement teams, sales, and others the real ability to work better together and make more effective, more fundamental and enjoyable decisions for their company. Thank you, Lily.
Thank you, Jerry. Colin, over to you.
Thanks, Lily. I'm Colin Levy. I am evangelist and director of legal for Malbek. I, like Jerry, am a big fan of legal technology, or just technology in general. I've been practicing for around 12 years at this point. I also still remember my law school days, not really all that fondly, but I still remember them. I am pretty outspoken on the topics of technology adaptation and forging your own way, especially in law. So I kind of look at myself as a little bit of like the anti-lawyer, because I'm constantly poking at all the flaws in which lawyers have traditionally practiced law. I love legal ops as well, because I see it as sort of the bridge between different functions. And in general, I'm a big, proponent of seeing management of contracts as being something that is aimed at empowering all the different functions of a business. The contract itself is a legal document, but the management of it is a cross-functional exercise. And so really the tools you should be using to manage those agreements should be ones that help empower other functions like business, sales, finance, what have you, and allows everyone to work collaboratively together.
So couldn't agree more. All right. So SharePoint side, I will pass it over to Lara first.
Thank you. So Lara Trope, I am a legal operations consultant, but really specializing in all things contracting CLM for the InnoLaw group. I have a background as a practicing lawyer and as in-house counsel, knowledge management, innovation lawyer, and then I built some legal tech for a while. So I've seen all sides of this deployed in various ways, but now hopefully use some of these skills to primarily help in-house teams to solve their contracting problems, whatever that means for them in their context. So yeah, I've seen some things and hoping to share those today. Yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. Noah, your turn.
I'm Noah Waisberg. I am a co-founder and the CEO of Zuva, which aims to bring contract AI to the masses through making it dead easy to get at it in whatever application you're using. Previous to that, I co-founded and was CEO of Kira Systems, which was kind of one of the original contracts AI companies. And I think by the time we exited, probably one of the most used, 18 of the world's top 25 law firms and parts of all the big four and a whole bunch of corporates used our contracts AI tech to find information in contracts. Also written a couple books, Wall Street Journal bestseller AI for Lawyers, as well as Robbie the Robot Learns to Read, which as far as we understand is the world's first children's book on machine learning. So that's why I'm especially focused on Jerry's promotional opportunities to the sort of under 10 age set. Just kidding.
Well,
I'm going to get
Yeah.
us dived into our questions
go.
here. Okay. So we have joked on our posts about the webinar that no virtual punches will be thrown. I think everyone can tell that we all quite like and appreciate each other very much, but we are calling this a showdown because it is a showdown. We are on two opposite sides here. So I want to hear all your perspective, anything good you got. I mean, Noah's looking really tough over there. So Jerry and Colin may be shaking in their boots. Diving in, teams. For a company that has no contract management processes in place, what is the best solution for them to use to get started? CLM or SharePoint? Discuss.
I think I will go first because
I was going to say somebody should have a really big opinion on this. I wanted to see where it came from. Jerry, go ahead.
No, honestly, so what I always tell people, and I know Colin has heard this before, because I think this was one of the first discussions Colin and I ever had when we met, was having a process is probably the most important thing. Coming up with a way to do this. And the reason I say that is, and I don't think SharePoint is a great solution. So I will put that out. But
shots fired.
I would rather you store things. If you came to me and said, what should I do? I would say, do you have a naming convention? How are you going to do this in the first place? Let's get everything into a place, follow a process, and at least get you started. And to be fair, my first repository was SharePoint. I created I set it up, I said, here's how every document's going to be named. Here's how we're going to save things. Here's how we're going to do that. But one of the things I learned very quickly was at a certain point, no matter what the process is that you set up, and I'm sure Lara and Noah have objections, in SharePoint, it's very manual. There are tools in SharePoint that can work with that, but it is an extensive process. One thing that I point out is the goal of the CLM vendors is to get that information out easier, to make it easier so that you're not going through that initial setup and building the SharePoint site. But when someone comes to me and says, I get 1 contract a month, 2 contracts a month, I tell them SharePoint's fine, or use Notion, someplace where you can build a database. And then when you're ready, come talk to the CLM vendors, talk to the legal tech advisors. So with that, the shots have been fired, as Lily said.
Well, so before we jump over to the SharePoint rebuttal here, I'm curious, Colin, what your perspective is. Do you think CLMs are designed to support people in the early stages of process creation for contract management? Do you think it's a good solution for someone who they may not have a SharePoint? Maybe they're putting things in a shared drive, or maybe they do use SharePoint as a contract repository. Are they ready to go into a CLM?
So that's a really interesting question. I tend to take the view that you need to be ready for a CLM solution before you use it, because otherwise it may not necessarily be what you need, or it may be more than what you need. That being said, I certainly have seen an increase in the number of solutions that are actually aimed at smaller companies that have less contract volume or less complexity. Because as Jerry pointed out, I think that SharePoint in general is not very good for proactive management of things. It is very good at storing documents and organizing documents. But for analytics and things beyond that, I don't think it's very good. And I can say that with some authority, having in one of my earlier roles assisted on developing a contract management system based off the SharePoint platform, and it was a complete disaster. Now I will be fully transparent. Part of the reason why it was a disaster was we had incomplete processes that we're basing assumptions off of, but it also was a complete disaster because the functionality just wasn't there for what we needed. I think that that's a long way of saying to your question, Lily, that I do think that CLMs, not many of them are necessarily aimed at some of these smaller companies, but there are some that do exist. Should there be more? Yes, that's probably the one area of CLM I think that there should be more CLMs. Don't get me started on whether I think there's too many kind of larger ones. because I
Sure.
realized that would perhaps hurt the position that I'm taking, which is pro CLM, but I'll leave that to the side for now.
Okay. Well, thank you both for your thoughts. So CLM team says CLM, Lara and Noah, not surprised by their responses, but what do you think?
Well, I think I was waiting for that so they could tee me up for my response, which is basically you asked about for somebody who has nothing, as a foundational, taking a foundational approach, your first step towards automating your contracting processes. Where we sit in our consultancies, we actually have the benefit of being vendor and tech agnostic. So we really go in, as you say, there has to be a process we have to organize, and contracting is not usually one team's problem. It usually goes across the organization. So, and let's not discount, sorting out that mess before you consume any kind of technology. And for a Microsoft shop, obviously the barrier to entry and the change management is super minimal. And that problem zero of knowing or figuring out what it is you're going to automate or what kind of technology you can consume takes a while. It's very, process-driven steps. There are things you need to do. And we found, enormous benefit for some people in figuring out what tech you already have. Can you use it better? So SharePoint, for example, and then also organizing your universe in a way before you make that choice about whether you need to layer on additional automation onto your Microsoft universe or potentially outgrow it and need something that is more rocket ship, take me to the moon kind of CLM that does everything. But we've seen lots of teams really benefit from doing that foundational work using SharePoint and leveraging it better. So when you talk about people who have nothing, taking a first step straight into a CLM system is often a misstep without having done that foundational work. Although, sometimes they'll stay in SharePoint, sometimes they'll go further, but using SharePoint initially is often very successful, or Microsoft, not just SharePoint.
Sure. No, thank you for that. And Noah, I'm curious, Lara mentioned change management and talking about setting these processes up kind of the right way before you move to some sort of rocket ship phase. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that, and I think I can guess, but do you think that it's easier from a change management, maybe time-saving perspective to go with SharePoint in the early stages of contract management?
So I think the CLMs are great. Like, I don't think Lara or I would say that we don't like CLMs or that in a sort of objective world, a CLM might not be a really good thing. But I think you have to think about the practical reality, which is that most companies are Microsoft shops and the contracts are where they are, right? Like, this isn't like you're founding a company on day one and like your first priority is contract management. It's like you're a big global enterprise. You have like tons of different teams doing tons of different things, and people have set up contract management systems to solve practical business problems, right? That often exist outside of the control of any sort of person. It's like a random ops person in the European tires division has set up contract management, and so has someone else in the European muffler division and the Brazilian transmissions division or whatever. And like, it's in SharePoint or Teams or maybe a local drive or something like that. And what we've heard over and over again is that that's how companies keep their contracts, right? Like, even companies where you think of them as they have whatever prominent CLM, like, that's not actually what they use. Like, 5 of their 65 teams use X, and the other like 60 of them. And so I think, and I say at best because I think a bunch of them are using local drives and the like. And so I think when you're at a company, you really need to think about like, where are my contracts right now? And to the extent my contracts right now are in SharePoint, I think that many of the objections that Jerry and Colin have raised are things that, if you use stock SharePoint might be troubling, but I think it's not that hard to get extensions onto SharePoint that can get you a lot of the functionality that you'd get out of a leading CLM. Not to say that maybe you shouldn't get to a CLM at some point in time, but when you have a complex organization with contracts in a lot of different places, I think for a lot of places, they might be better off trying to optimize their SharePoint as a first step, and then maybe move some of those contracts to a CLM later down the road if it's appropriate. But as a first step, I think just having to migrate your contracts from one place to another, and having to get people used to using their contracts in some different flow, like the change management of that, and dealing with the problem that, again, the Brazilian muffler division doesn't feel like moving and isn't willing to. You just might get a lot more done by staying at SharePoint and trying to optimize it as a first step. Not necessarily the only step, not that CLM can't be great someday, but just get your house in order first. And you can do that, I think, quite well with SharePoint right now.
Sure. Yes, go ahead, Jerry.
Oh no, I'm going to go back at Noah on this.
Cool.
And I don't think I don't think Noah's entirely incorrect. Just most no. But I think, and this is a real important part. And one of the things that you have to bring up if you're the CLM vendor, or if you're consulting on implementation of any new project, any new service, any new process within a business, whether it's a small change or a global change impacting one division or 600 divisions, there is a tremendous amount of change management needed. And in fact, one of the first things that I like to talk about with customers and other folks, and this does kind of go to the question in the Q&A from Lucy Bastley, who I think, Lara, that's your boss. So hopefully she probably knows the answers already. But
written them down a couple of times.
I think the number one thing that folks fail to think about, no matter what they're doing, is change management. And the reason so much of this is so hard is for a lot of what Noah was saying is CLMs are wonderful. You can we could do amazing things that you can't do in SharePoint, even with some of the extensions. But if your entity, if your company, if your organization is not going to be willing to work on change, or is not willing to take the steps to get that done, this is one of those areas where you have to sit down. You have to determine who's going to be the champion. If it is the Brazilian, what was that, Brazilian muffler division?
I don't know. I think I made up two different ones.
So if the Brazilian muffler division is saying we're struggling with contracts, you then, as the vendor, have to really think about two things, whether you're talking about SharePoint or you're talking about CLM. One, are we going to start with you, Brazilian muffler division, or is this going to be something global? Because global, you're going to need all the people who are going to be involved. You're going to need, and this goes whether it's that one little group or a global group. You're going to need to get your champions. You're going to need to get these tools, someone in your organization to be saying, I am going to lead this. So if you're that one Brazilian muffler division, you're going to want to bring in your salespeople in that division. You're going to want to bring in procurement and say, how do we do this better? What would be easier for you? And I mean, they're going to come back. Sales is going to say, I want this in our CRM. Procurement's going to say, I want this in our procurement system. So you're going to want to make sure everything connects. Now, again, we're talking, are there manual connections? Are they APIs? Are they integrations with your CLM? Are they integrations with other tools? Yes, but I think the very first step you really have to take is, how is this going to affect us? How are we going to implement these changes? And who's going to be involved? And of course, the other side of that is, who's going to fight back against it? Who's going to want to keep the status quo and avoid changing anything? And this is something that I think, especially for me and Colin, I know we get these questions daily. I get at least once a day, hey, I'm struggling with so-and-so. They don't want to use the system. What do I tell them to do? How do I make them use it? And, that's difficult, even it's something that I learned personally, because frankly, first time I put in a CLM, I told my sales team and my procurement team, I'm the GC, this is what we're going to do. And that CLM implementation failed. The second time, and I was a customer of ContractPodAi, I purchased it. I brought everybody into the table. I brought folks from sales, procurement, all of these teams, and said, what did we do wrong before? What can we do right now? How is this going to work for you? And, that made a tremendous difference in the positive reception and the usability because people felt they had a voice, they were actually involved. I don't know if that quite answered Lucy's question, but I think the number one thing I talk about now is, are you ready to make the change?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Oh, sorry, Lara, go ahead.
No, I don't entirely disagree with Jerry. No, I mostly agree with Jerry on that one. I know. In fact, I do agree with you.
Mostly correct.
No, it's we only disagree with Noah.
No, not me.
Jerry,
and just channeling
your arguments make as much sense as.
So just to say that, it's not beyond change management, and it's that whole readiness package is not to be underestimated. And that's why there is a whole universe of things that happen before we get to this very question, which is the actual selection and implementation, and going from 0 to 1, and taking that first step in organizing a universe, getting data, figuring it out. It certainly happened in the SharePoint Microsoft universe. And like I said, you can make a choice to go on, but absolutely never underestimate that package of readiness, change management being one of those things, requirements gathering, stakeholders, everything Jerry mentioned. But that there is a universe that we live in, probably more than maybe Jerry, Colin, and Noah for months before. And it's definitely not something to be underestimated as part of the considerations of this entire conversation.
Yeah, completely agree. So moving forward, Jerry, I think you made a great point about buy-in, right? We talked about each of these different solutions. CLM side obviously supports the idea of CLMs as you try to transition into a better contract management process. Our SharePoint team obviously has the other side of this, but let's move forward with our questions and assume we have buy-in from whatever team to move forward with one of these solutions, right? Change management will still be a challenge, but it's there. Let's think about cost effectiveness, both financially, how people are spending their time, et cetera, choosing to move forward with contract management, either in CLM or SharePoint. Which is the most cost-effective? SharePoint team, over to you first to answer that question.
Well, I think you have to think about, the easy answer from the SharePoint side is to say, if you're already a Microsoft shop, you're going to be able to fully leverage the value of your Microsoft subscription. But actually, when it comes down to it, you are going to need to probably put some either add-ons or work from your IT team to make the SharePoint most well adapted to you. There are cool add-ins that you can bring in, like even world's leading ContractPodAi by Zuva or things like that you can get into SharePoint, but those things do cost extra. And unless you're able to get sort of like an add-in or something that's already built, you may be spending human time on getting this right. I think the overall situation is it's really important that you just look at what the overall value that you're getting out of this are and how you can most quickly get to value. I think what Jerry and Colin are going to say is that you can probably get to a higher value using a contract management system, so that you should just even spend the extra money to get one of those. But what I would argue is that that's only true if you get a sort of good adoption of the product. And I think you're more likely to have heavy adoption of an improved SharePoint product, at least initially, until you get to the phase where everyone is ready to go to a full CLM. And in the situation where you are an organization where they have tons of, again, like 65 different business units on 65 different contract management systems that are all based on SharePoint, I would argue that you're probably better off just trying to put lipstick on that and make that a better improved situation, add in things like ContractPodAi, add in other functionality, like maybe add an across the board intake workflow and other pieces. And that by doing that, you can kind of more quickly get those teams up to speed and just make a lot more impact across the organization, as opposed to a CLM where you're going to spend a lot of money getting it, but then you also are going to have real change management and adoption problems that could take years to resolve.
If I'll just add quickly to Noah's, which is to say, like, we talk about CLM as one conglomerate thing, where it's, different aspects of what you're trying to automate. Certainly, knowing that is helpful for the context of the discussion, but we won't go down that rabbit hole too deep. But to say that, SharePoint and things like that have their sweet spot for a certain context, for a certain team, for a certain size, volume. So depending what it is that you're seeking to automate in your contract lifecycle, certainly it can be a very cost-effective solution. For example, we've been into organizations where they have a very baked-in repository that's not going to move. They just need some automation for some of the aspects of the lifecycle. Really optimizing the way they're using SharePoint, as Noah says, maybe layering on an intake, like a legal front door that has a little more bells and whistles, is certainly sufficient for them, especially if they've invested heavily and moved an entire organization into a immovable repository, for example. So absolutely, depending on what part of their entire contracting process you're actually seeking to automate, it absolutely can be the most cost-effective thing to do, is to optimize aspects of it. Because truthfully, we know that SharePoint, Microsoft out the box has certain limitations, but it, like I said, does have its sweet spot, and there are things you can do to make it better more cheaply, especially if there are immovable other things in place where layering on big end-to-end CLM technology with all its features may not fit as well as it could if there was nothing else there.
Sure. Thank you. CLM team, what are your thoughts?
So I'll go first, and I can see Jerry smiling because I know he has.
No, I wanted to give Colin a chance to answer something. I felt like he was feeling left out.
I talk enough as it is, trust me.
Better that he feels left out than that you just feel crushed by the fact that your arguments just keep getting smoked every time you say anything.
Oh boy! Oh
Noah,
wow! Now we're really
can we
getting
just
into
mute Noah?
Oof. No.
Sorry, I'm just kidding.
This is tough for me because I'm trying to be.
I'm gonna I think I'm joking around, but the next time I see Jerry at a conference, I'm gonna get punched in the face or something.
Yeah,
Noah, it already hurt enough the last time I punched you.
Oh my gosh!
all right, Colin, go ahead.
Sorry,
I'm not getting between. I'm not getting in between you two. So I think. Look, I'm perfectly willing to say that I think that if you are evaluating value over the short term, will you get more value out of using something you already have than moving to something new? The likelihood is yes. So therefore, if you already have Microsoft and therefore have access to SharePoint and then want to use SharePoint more effectively, you'll likely get more immediate value out of using that tool right off the bat. Over the long term, though, and I realize that people are impatient, and that's unfortunate, but you have to be patient, I think, in some ways. I do believe over the long term, you're going to get more value out of something that is more cohesive and more coherent and more comprehensive, and that you get through a CLM solution. However, you have to have your users involved from the get-go in the process. To Jerry's point earlier, you really need, when you're evaluating tools, when you're looking at them, when you're testing them out, you want to have your users, people who are at the front lines of your contract management function, using whatever tool it is from the get-go. Because if you all of a sudden say, hey, I want to do something and then impose it upon them, they're not going to want to use it. They're just not. However, if you get them involved early and have them testing things out, yeah, you'll be able to more likely to get support, and you're more likely to get value over the long term. And the way I say, and the way I think about long term is, you look at it in terms of usage, you look at it in terms of the data you're getting, the automation success you're having, the amount of productivity you're getting, and sort of the improvements you're noticing in your contracting function. So those tend to be things that are best seen through a long-term lens. Over the short term, those things I think are just harder to kind of get a handle on because you need enough data to make a conclusion about those things. So certainly using SharePoint initially for short-term value and gain probably makes sense if you're already using Microsoft. But I think over the long term, you're going to see a more dedicated, specialized solution win out.
Jerry, anything to add there?
I like what Colin said. Honestly, I think a lot of that would be In fact, I agree with all of that. And I think ultimately I will adopt and simply restate what Colin said without repeating it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I want to play off something that Lara said about kind of this repository that the company has stuck with and they're not moving. It's what everybody uses. It's what they're comfortable with. We see things like that happen a lot. I say we as in legal operations professionals, right? We've all kind of been in a place where, whether it's in a past role as a lawyer or whatever, companies have a process they're not willing to change. And sometimes technology is expected to add on to that process and make it better in some way. So let's talk a little bit about flexibility on the side of the solution, not necessarily the company. So let's say you've got a company that has, say, a repository they're not moving, but they want to automate other parts of their system. Are they going to be best served by a CLM that connects to that repository? Or are they going to be best served by SharePoint or SharePoint add-ons or anything like that? Let's start with the CLM team.
So I think, Lily, the answer is yes. They're going to be served by one or the other of them. I know that's kind of a cop-out answer.
A little bit.
What I think is, thank you, Lily.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I do believe is that if you are in that kind of situation and you need a solution that you can automate other things with, it's
Mhm.
going to depend. Again, I think a lot of this depends on the company lifecycle as well. And again, going back to the change management answer and going back to these other ideas we've been throwing around. If I go and need to tie into other systems, having the ability to connect them together is very key.
Mhm.
Having the ability to access it and pull that information in becomes critical to the. So if you're trying to integrate with these, if it's got the integrations built in, if you've got the ability to do that quickly, of course you're in a better place. I do think that there is that, whether if your existing repositories in SharePoint right now, or you pulled it into Salesforce or somewhere else, having the ability to get that out or be able to access it is something that you're going to want to keep. Now, CLMs should support that and help you migrate it over. SharePoint, it works with. Noah's smiling with this horrific grin, and I'm just terrified.
I'm laughing at Colin tried to write the Feisty group here, but got Fiesta group here. Just as he mistyped there, his arguments, he's been put a little bit off. Right?
Well,
sorry, I'm just cracking jokes left.
I just saw a taco and a hot pepper appear in the chat we have. So for those of you who are participants, I know you can't see this, but there has been a constant
even more
chat.
Trash talk going on in the chat.
In the chat, sure. It's a rough. This is like paper. I think this is pay-per-view like fight over here for sure. But yeah, sorry. So
no. I think go ahead, Lily.
I was going to ask you, I get what you're saying about the integrations. I think that's super important regardless of the solution you're working with. But what about the ability to, say you can integrate with that repository as our example, what about the ability to implement custom workflows, add features on top of that? Like talk me through some of that with how a CLM might support that.
I think one, I will be careful and say that does depend on the CLM.
Sure.
There are numerous levels of contract lifecycle management programs out there, ranging from the most basic, we're a repository, we allow you to search easily, to, and I think Malbek and ContractPodAi both fall into the full-featured, heavy workflow, significant AI and natural language processing capabilities, significant workflow maintenance and create and drag and drop capability. And Colin, Colin, I don't want to speak for Malbek here, but if I do get something wrong, please let me know. And I think there's a very
don't worry, I'll be all over you if you get something wrong.
I think there's
even in between teammates. So
there's this tremendous difference in capabilities and designed to go along with the business lifecycle. So if you came to me and said, can ContractPodAi also create workflows for, let's say, legal intake? I would say absolutely. We offer a legal intake product as well that has a workflow, can tie into the CLM. We actually have people using the system for IP management. We have folks using it for corporate governance because they're able to create workflows. And because we're already configured for one legal task, it's been very easy to extend the system for other legal tasks. When I look at it, I tend to think of everything in law as a document. So to me, it's just it's documents on top of it's documents all the way down, which I think is supposed to be turtles all the way down, but it's documents all the way down in my brain. So I think but it depends on the system. You know, if you choose something like ContractPodAi or like Malbek, you have some additional flexibility that you may not have with some other CLMs that are very, very focused on get the document in, record that it was signed. That's all they care about. And again, I think you could do some of this with SharePoint, but I do know that if you're starting with that, you may be building that all by yourself. Now, again, I know Microsoft has some tools. They have a drag and droppy thingy that I've never been able to figure out. So I've been able to
technical term for it, drag and drop.
Yes.
Of course, you haven't been able to figure it out, Jerry.
I taught myself how to build a workflow in ContractPod in 32 minutes without instruction. I spent a week reading SharePoint documentation and turned it over to a SharePoint administrator.
It's an interesting concept for sure. I'm going to turn it over to Colin just to see if he has anything to add here in terms of CLM flexibility for creating custom features, custom workflows, et cetera, for the individual client.
Yeah. So, I think that one hallmark of a good CLM solution is one that recognizes that business needs are inherently dynamic, and therefore any workflow you set up will need to be adjusted on the fly from time to time. And certainly both of our solutions offer that. And based off of my personal experience with SharePoint, yeah, you can modify things in SharePoint, sure. But it's not as, I think, straightforward as it should be or can be. And I do think that in CLM solutions, at least good ones like ours, and by ours, I mean
wow.
my own.
Thank you, Colin.
I wasn't just going to say mine, Jerry.
Descend in the ranks of the CLMs.
No dissent. Do offer that level of flexibility. And quite frankly, people ask about that constantly in terms of either saying, oh, our existing system is so inflexible and it's a pain in the ass and it's wasting all this time. Or, hey, if I have a solution, if I use your solution, I've got this person who is in charge of signing, but they're probably going to be promoted and be replaced by someone else. How hard is it to put a new person in? They're going to want your answer to be, oh, that's no issue, no problem at all. Just simply put their person, change the name and you're all set. So I certainly think flexibility and ease of use are very key to both adoption as well as usability and consistency over time.
Sure. No, absolutely. I think that makes a ton of sense. And one of the words used that I love is dynamic, because you're absolutely right. Business needs are dynamic. Legal team work is dynamic. Everything changes all the time. And it's certainly something to pay close attention to. So Lara and Noah, talk me through the flexibility and how SharePoint can answer this kind of dynamic need in all of these people's contract management needs.
Okay, sure. Well, I will say that SharePoint can and Microsoft can technically do anything. So you're talking about flexible. Can it be maneuvered in a way to do everything it needs to do? Yes. Is that always ideal in every circumstance? Probably not. Similarly, in terms of systems that can do everything, is it always ideal? Yes and no. So again, as you say, business needs are different. So from a flexibility point of view, we've also seen people who think they want everything, like the most super configurable universe in the world. They cannot consume it. They don't know. It just gets over configured and it just doesn't actually get consumed well, and then ultimately that implementation fails. So while flexibility is often prioritized as of hyper importance to certain people, there is a flip side in an organization about what they can and cannot consume in their context. So sometimes giving them a couple of guardrails, again, to start off with or to live in, like a universe that is quantifiable, like a SharePoint universe with a couple of bells and whistles, might be better for them. And like I said, they sometimes grow out of it, or they sometimes really embed in it and just layer on extra technology. But I won't dispute the point that CLM systems definitely have more advanced features to play with in certain contexts, and that the configurability and a per user lens is certainly there, where it's less so in a SharePoint universe. But I have seen, like I said, it very much depend on people getting not just what they think they want, but what they actually need and what they can consume. And so it depends what your flexibility means for you. Do you need, is flexibility in what context of this entire thing? Is it integrations? Is it configurability? Is it, what part of that life cycle, again, is your focus? So I would just say, on a note on flexibility, technically, can they both be super flexible? Yes, but you really need to know what it is you're serving, and sometimes you don't need all of it. Sometimes it may be too much.
In terms of setting up things, like SharePoint is a platform that like literally any of us could figure out how to set it up better. Like certainly there are SharePoint administrators who could do a much better job than us, but like literally we could go onto Amazon right now. We could choose one of the pages of books on how to use SharePoint, right? Like there's a massive amount of materials there, and we could figure it out ourselves. If we didn't feel like doing that, we could, instead of having to hunt through like the 3 or 4 different consultancies that can work with different CLMs, we could use one of those consultancies, like certainly places like Deloitte or Mainspring or whoever have plentiful people who can help you with SharePoint. But we could also go on like Upwork and choose from thousands of different consultants with different kind of price points too, right? Ranging from people who are going to be very experienced to people who are maybe in lower cost jurisdictions and have a much wider choice of that. If we need an administrator, we can get someone who's super experienced with using SharePoint and teaching it to do things, and we can find that much more easily than we can for any CLM. In terms of a community of people who can help you out, like, while SharePoint may not be putting on fancy dinners or anything like that, that are sponsored by a vendor, like there are a vast number of people who know how to use it, including probably if you're a Microsoft shop within your own company, within your own IT department. And then when it comes to integrations, like it's just not close. Like the community of use of people who use SharePoint is so large that if you're a vendor thinking about, well, should I build an integration with like random CLM or with SharePoint, like the amount of usage that you can get out of your integration with SharePoint is such that that SharePoint integration is going to get prioritized first. And so while I think out of the box SharePoint is probably not the solution to all your contract management needs, you can really get a lot of advantage out of using the same platform that millions of other people around the world do. And that's the spot where in integrations, I think you do very well. And then while we're talking about integrations, let's not forget that for most lawyers, like back when I was a lawyer and to today, I think most lawyers spend most of their time in Microsoft tools. So do finance people, right? Like you're spending your time in Outlook, you're spending your time in Word, you're spending your time in Excel. I don't know that PowerPoint is the biggest sort of contracts spot, but you're doing that. And then to the extent you need to automate things, like Power Automate is great. It is shockingly easy to use and comes really nicely integrated with SharePoint. There's Power BI if you need to visualize things. Like the Microsoft universe is a pretty good place to be if you are needing to integrate your system with others.
I will say.
Oh, I was going to say, Power Automate was the automate thingy that I was trying to remember earlier.
Nice.
So
it's pretty. I've been playing. I have to do a demo. I'm presenting tomorrow, and I've had to sort of learn. Normally, I have a teammate who's excellent who does our Power Automate demos, but I'm on stage, not him. And so I've been learning it over the past little stretch. And like by little stretch, I mean like hours, not weeks. And it's shockingly easy to use and very powerful, and just so many integrations built into it, ranging from things like Outlook to things like Zuva. So you can get a lot of power out of those things.
I will say to Noah's point that Microsoft has a number of tools, including Power Automate or Automate in Power BI that are really good and not that hard to learn, and pretty powerful. And I think that is certainly something that they offer that is useful. But my question really is, I think if you're evaluating kind of what is best for you, while there may be a lot of people who are using Microsoft, just because everyone is using one thing doesn't necessarily means it's the right thing for you. Last thing you want to be doing is being a lemming climbing up a cliff about ready to jump off just because other people are doing it. So I will say that, just because your friends are doing something doesn't mean that they're, your best source of truth for using a certain tool.
Are we into closing statement? That seems closing statement-esque.
Sorry, I was thinking about closing statement-esque, so that's why I made that.
Noah, if Lily tells you to go drop off a bridge, are you going to do it?
Oh, goodness.
So I don't know. Lily's the moderator. She's not even
I'm a big deal today.
SharePoint.
So thank you.
Hey, Lily, I did hear, though, you drop a little bit of, a little shade on my friend Jerry earlier, so...
Lily's being inspired. I'm sure it's my fault if I've made this a more trash talking panel.
No worries. I love the trash talk. Actually, I want to play with that a little bit for a couple more minutes, and then I'm going to go over to the questions. So I'm going to ask some questions. I want you to just react, right? Answer which is better, CLM or SharePoint. Give me a couple words as to why. I want to feel the fight here. I want to feel the showdown. So get ready. Are you ready? Are you in? Okay, I'm seeing some nodding. So we're talking about which solution offers better features at which stage of the contract lifecycle. Okay, so CLM or SharePoint, SharePoint or CLM, yell it out quickly. Tell me why. Pre-signing process, intake, legal intake, which is better?
Those are two separate things.
CLM.
Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, like category of pre-signing to get things into legal intake, get contract requests into legal. Is CLM better or SharePoint?
CLM.
Wait,
CLM.
CLM.
That was
under my breath.
CLM out of the box, though you can configure SharePoint. So I think.
Okay, fair enough.
You can, just not that well. Still manual input. Sorry, carry on.
About collaboration during negotiation of a contract.
SharePoint.
Yeah.
Oh, come
on. I think that's an integration question. If you're that's really an integration question. If you've got a full Word integration in your CLM, there's no difference between that. If you have to pull it out and then put it in Word Online, then of course SharePoint just opens it natively. So I don't have a good answer for that, but I think native SharePoint, but integration with CLM.
Yeah, that's what I was going to go for, Jerry, but I just thought it was better to just say CLM. So
fair enough. No, I like it. I think that's really interesting. Okay, last one before we go to questions. Collection of data from signed contracts.
CLM.
CLM, bar none.
SharePoint with Zuva.
Nice.
I don't know. Like realistically, you can get the Zuva tech or other tech in SharePoint, or you can get it in a CLM, and like I think the CLMs will have probably layered some other stuff on top of it that could be really useful, but I think you can get so I'm not necessarily going to say that you can't be better off in a CLM, but I think you can get to very good in SharePoint, and you can get there with a lot less fuss, maybe, without having to adopt as much other stuff.
Well, that was fun. Thanks for
Sorry, Jerry looks very cut off. Let's give Jerry a second. No, I think
I-
like the CLMs will have layered other stuff on top of, they'll either have built their own tech like Zuva's, or they'll have incorporated Zuva's and built some other tech on top, which I think you can totally get value from. So you may be better there, but I think you can get to a lot better than you think in SharePoint using off-the-shelf tools. And I think probably the stuff you can get in SharePoint, like I'd like to think the Zuva stuff is probably better than you can get in a lot of CLMs too, who've built their own. Maybe not every single one who's built their own, but I think certainly some.
I just wanted to make a quick note. I think it's pretty obvious that the result of this webinar is classic lawyer answer. It depends, right? It depends on your need, depends on your use case, depends on what you want to use.
Does it
for.
depend? No.
Well, I mean,
Did
you
we
guys
win?
decide.
Yeah.
Audience decide.
I don't know. Colin's made his Leving argument. Do we get to make the rest of our closing arguments?
You can if you'd like.
No,
No,
No closing argument from you, Jerry. You just think the Lemming was so strong.
no. I mean, listen. I agree. If you're willing to follow someone off a bridge, Noah, go right ahead.
You know what they
You guys
always
are
say?
both
They say,
like
they
so
say
mad
follow
at
the
me off of
data.
this that you're trying to shove me off a bridge. You're like, you'll be following Lara off a bridge because we're throwing her off.
Authorities are showing
No,
up.
we'll keep Lara. Lara's fine with us.
yeah,
Thanks. Except I say follow the data. The data says 90% of lawyers use SharePoint for negotiation. So Lemmings for the win.
So Jerry, you, me, and Lara all have 9 or 10-year-olds, right? And what we're talking about is like you're going to dinner in New York with them. Should you take them to Le Bernardin, or should you take them to the Cheesecake Factory, like or Lombardi's? Like objectively, Le Bernardin is a great place, right? Like truly one of the best fish restaurants in the world. It's really spectacular. The service is fantastic. They can, cook a piece of fish just so nicely. But like you got a 10-year-old, like you have a situation that might not be ideal. And maybe like that perfectly prepared piece of flounder is just not what's going to speak to them in the same way that the easily configurable menu of the Cheesecake Factory may enable them to get mac and cheese. Well, you get, maybe not like the 99th percentile piece of salmon, but like a solid 80th percentile or 75th percentile piece of salmon. And so I think like in a objective sense, like, would I rather go to Le Bernardin for dinner tomorrow night? Like, yes, I would. But like, if I had my 10-year-old with me, then I might choose the Cheesecake Factory instead. And in fact, I might have a pretty unpleasant time if I tried to get my 10-year-old to come to Le Bernardin. And it just as it is with SharePoint and CLMs, like I think in an objective world, and I think a world that a lot of companies are trying to get to, the CLMs offer great power, great functionality. Like we were talking about with the AI, like AI layered on top of it, AI just to provide a really, really, really nice outcome, thoughtfully put together for that use case. But I think in a practical world where you're dealing with organizations that have come with a lot of baggage, come with a lot of contracts and a lot of processes, and people who are used to doing things one way, I think that's where thinking about if you can optimize your CLM in SharePoint, you may get more mileage there and get to a place where you can eventually migrate into a CLM and get a much quicker onboarding and really be a success story for that CLM. So I think just trying to make yourself successful in SharePoint can be a really great onboarding step towards getting to a CLM. Just as, hopefully my son trying the salmon at the Cheesecake Factory onboards him towards someday coming to Le Bernardin with me.
I think that's a good point, Noah. I think going back to what I said at the very, very beginning, I think the most important thing is to start working out your process, coming up with a way to make this work, because just throwing everything in a folder is not going to be the what you want, what you need to really make yourself successful. It'll work when you're at a 1 contract a month stage. But if you're processing 2,000-3,000 contracts a month, or even 20, having a system that you can follow, a process you can follow, whether that's dictated by CLM or it's something you've created your own, is really the end all be all, is really the core thing I think people have to think about. And by all means, you know, again, I can't speak for Colin, but if you're in SharePoint, we will help you move on from it. But the first thing I always say is, what do you currently do, and how can we get you from where you are to the next stage of your transformation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with Jerry on this. I think, you know, we also, you know, are eager to help you, but you also have to be ready to be helped in some ways and understand kind of what your kind of current lay of the land is and what the ideal state looks like, and have the willingness and patience and wherewithal to be able to get from A to B, because it's not a straight line. But it will be a worthwhile journey and you'll be the better for it. But you know, you got to start at square one with anything, regardless of whether you're trying to make use of SharePoint for this or make use of a CLM. You have to understand your current reality and what good looks like. And if you don't know what good looks like, you need to before you begin this journey, because otherwise you're going to be on a wandering journey, end up in a place that who knows what that looks like for you, but it likely will not be as good as whatever your current state is, even if your current state is not good.
I feel like we should let Lara get the last word.
Yeah, I was going to say she has not closed, and I know we didn't get to the questions, or we got to some of them by virtue of the things we talked about, but I will reach out to anybody whose question we didn't answer. Laura, let us know. What are your thoughts? Closing thoughts?
The pressure. No, I agree with bits of and most of what everybody said, because like I said, where we sit, it's all about knowing what you need. It's all about taking the time to figure it out properly. We believe that all tech does what it say it can do to some extent, with some limitations and some superpowers. But, you know, wrapping your arms around it the right way will set you up for success. So taking the time to figure out exactly what it is you are currently doing, what you need to fix, and then pointing yourself in the right direction, setting yourself up well will make you successful in any one of these systems. And some, they're just better suited to different contexts for various reasons. So I get to be the it depends person and close it out.
Audience, thank you so much for staying with us.
Thanks, Lily.
Need more votes.
I think we all actually agree here, right? That CLMs are great if you can get there, and it's just getting there is a big trick. And so it's just a question of how much effort it is and like what's the best way to get there. That we all think that CLMs can be really, really, really great and powerful tech when properly implemented. It's just like that.
I think that goes, and Noah, that goes for any technology, I think.
Agreed.
Yeah, you have to have that proper implementation. You have to have the transformation. You have the change management, and just doing it partially is, I think, the biggest problem that happens and tends to fail when these implementations fail of any technology. It's a lack of change management. It's a lack of planning. It's a lack of process management.
Right.
So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Whatever your solution, whatever your preferred solution, whatever your interest or your needs of your company, we all fully support. And we're here to answer any questions you have. Follow us on LinkedIn, reach out to any one of us. We'd always be happy to talk to you about this topic, your contract management needs, any of it. But thank you everyone for joining us. To our panelists, thank you. Our audience, really appreciate you listening in.